Hello and welcome to the Jacksonville History Show. I'm Emily Rutherford-Liska, Executive Director of the Jacksonville Historical Society, and this is the show that analyzes and celebrates local history. So welcome, glad you're with us. And I have two guests today, and these are guests that have a great interest and a great passion in a very important topic. And we'll get to that topic in a minute. First, let me introduce Lynn Corley. She is a scholar of great passion and a great scholar of the French in Florida, and especially French in 16th century Florida. And also with us today, Joan Alford. Joan, welcome. And Joan is the regent for the Jean Ribault chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Correct. Get that right? And thank you for being with us, both of you. And we're all here to celebrate Jean Ribault's arrival in North Florida 450 years ago. And I think it's interesting that as we tape this show, Jean Ribault was readying his sailing vessels for his voyage to North Florida. And what an exciting voyage that was 450 years ago. He left Grace Harbor. But Lynn, we're going to really let you and Joan tell this story. First of all, Lynn, before we get into the story, I just want to welcome you as well. And how long have you been studying this incomparable history related to North Florida?
I've only known the story about 10 years, which is a very short time since I've lived here 25 years. But when I heard the story, it so intrigued me. And actually the person telling the story was from Washington, D.C., and I thought, no, this isn't quite right. I've got to find out what the story is. And it's led to the most amazing events that I think happened in America during that period of time, and world events. All eyes were on what is now Jacksonville, Florida. In 1562 to 1565, Western Europe was looking to see what was going to happen in what is now Jacksonville.
So Jacksonville is not only getting ready to celebrate Ribault's departure 450 years ago from Grace Harbor, we are getting ready to celebrate his arrival at, we know what we call today, of course, the St. Johns, the mouth of the St. Johns. Right. He would name the river, but we'll get to that too. Joan, what about you? You've been in touch with this story because of your relationship in the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, correct?
Right. Well, I'm from the Jacksonville area originally. My family goes back for generations in Florida, so I'm kind of an armchair historian. And so I spent a lot of time reading about Jacksonville history and Florida history. And the initials DAR popped up over and over again. I finally asked my mother, you know, she knows everything as far as I was concerned. I asked her about DAR, and she said, well, you could be a member of that organization. I said, really? And she says, yes. And so my sister started doing a lot of studying to our genealogy while I was reading Florida history. And she discovered that, yes, we in fact had an American patriot in our tree, our family tree. And so I just went right to that DAR website and figured out how to join. And I looked for the closest chapter to my home, which is in Atlantic Beach, and it was a Jean Ribault chapter. And so that's the chapter that I joined.
How fitting.
Yes,
How fitting.
Yes, it was. It was very exciting.
As we celebrate this man who we really don't know enough about.
Right.
You can't really find a Ribault scholar out there.
Well, I found one in my reading, and studying.
Who would you give that honor to?
Lynn Corley,
actually. Okay, thank you. I was going to say. Well, and I introduced her that.
Yes.
And in fact, let's get to that now. Because we keep talking about the story of Ribault's arrival, let's tell what happened after, you know, let's get to that story.
That's an excellent storyteller.
So if we can pull up that first image, and I'll let you know when that's up. Here we go. And Lynn, that first image of Catherine de Medici is up. So start with the story.
We want to start with that story because the background in Europe is why there was any founding of a colony on the land that became Jacksonville. What was going on in 1561 was that the Protestant movement had moved into France, and a new sect had been formed through the teachings of John Calvin. And those who were followers of this new sect felt that they were wanting to worship outside of the established church. They felt that salvation came through their relationship with Christ and not through the church. They were known as singers and lovers of the Scripture. But here is Catherine de' Medici, a queen mother of a 9-year-old king, guiding a nation where two political factions are formed. One, the Catholic Church, the other, the Huguenot movement. And they were political factions as well as believers in different theological stances. So in order to preserve that throne for her children to come, Catherine tried to make a balance between the Catholics and the Huguenots. But as that balance was very unstable, a man came forth, Gaspard de Coligny.
Now, let's go to the net. There you go. There
And Gaspard de Coligny was converted to this Huguenot religion. He was the Admiral of France. He had grown up at court. He was well known. He was so well known that even the King of France called him Papa because the king's father had died. So he put forth this thought that there could be a church that functions outside of that established church. And he was known as a glorious initiator of the principle of religious freedom. He could see what seems so obvious to us today, that people could have religious thought outside of one church. They could worship outside of one church. But in 1561, that was not happening. There was great persecution against this movement of Huguenotism to the point that Huguenots were burned at the stake. Their worship services were attacked. People were killed. So he saw an idea that to prevent civil war, perhaps a colony could be established in this new world.
Can we enter Jean Ribault now? And we have an image of Ribault.
In comes Jean Ribault. He's chosen to lead an expedition to look for a place in this new world where there were no colonies at the time, and to find a haven for these people to worship. Now, it is not quite as simple as one purpose. Obviously, Catherine de' Medici wanted to expand her borders and her influence in the New World as Spain had. She wanted to find riches. She wanted her boundaries stretched. But here is an opportunity for these Huguenots to help in her plan. So Jean Ribault, a well-known seaman from Dieppe, a navigator who had trained in England, who had served both the kings of England and France, is chosen to lead this expedition. And on February 18th,
and we'll show that
1562,
Grace Harbor, here it is.
A group of men,
450 years ago.
450 years ago, this coming week, this week, Jean Ribault and his second in command, René de Laudonnière, sailed looking for a place, a haven, a new colony, a place for a colony. And they sailed a new course across the Atlantic. The significance is that they sailed a course that others had said was impossible to sail. They wanted a new course because they did want to avoid the Spanish and have not conflict during that time. And it was a time of conflict between the Spanish and the French on the seas. So as they sailed over a 9-week period, they began to see land in what we call Florida, the Spanish call La Florida, and the French would call New France.
So as the sun set on April the 30th, 1562, and we'll go to that image, a beautiful sunset,
they spotted a land, and they had great intrigue over what they were seeing and what we know as the St. John's. They were spotting a place that they wanted a port, a deep water port.
He was at this point at the mouth of what we know as the St. John's River, although there's a little more to that story, which I'm sure you'll reveal.
He was at the mouth, and his journal, Ribault wrote a beautiful journal of why he felt he was chosen to lead this and what he saw. And when he spotted this land, which is what we call Jacksonville, he thought it was a beautiful land. He was intrigued by that, and also this enormous opening into the ocean. He anchored off the coast, and on May 1st, May 1st, 1562, he and oarsmen came ashore at what is probably Fort George Island today and set foot on the land for the first time for the French on La Florida.
And because it was May 1st, he actually named the river.
He did, the Rivière de Mai, or River May, and from that we even have a lingering name, and that is Mayport, the port of the River May. We still celebrate today. And it was not at Mayport probably on May 1st, that first day, but he did cross the river into Mayport. But on May 1st, he encountered friendly natives. I think that's very significant in the history of looking at attempts at colonization, is how those from Europe approached the natives.
And let's move to the next image.
There, May 1st, he knelt on the sands of our shores and prayed the first Protestant prayer of America. At Huguenot Park, there's a memorial that says that was the first Protestant worship service of America. So here we are sitting today on land where a beginning was, the beginning of religious freedom, the foundation that was established that day that led to later on establishing of a colony, and even today we celebrate that foundation of religious freedom in our nation.
The foundation of our country,
yes,
absolutely.
The foundation of America.
And so now we'll move to the next image, and here you see the Mocama speaking Timucua. Tell about this one.
Well, we call him Mocama because a local archaeologist has informed us that the Timucua word was really a word that meant enemy, and we call the First Nations people that Ribault met Timucua and have for many years, but we're going to try to correctly call them Mocama speaking. That was their language. He met first with the chief on the north bank.
And he being Ribault.
Ribault, and we think that was probably Chief Alamacani, and we today have a school name for Alamacani. And there was friendly relationship. There was exchange of gifts. The chief took off his girdle, a red girdle, and passed it on to Ribault. Ribault reciprocated. Of course, there was no language between them, but yet the journals indicate there was a friendly, peaceful relationship, which but would be very important for colonization. There was not a taking of the land, a forceful taking of the land. There was an attempt to make relationships. So after the first encounter on the north bank, Ribault sailed across to the south bank, to probably what is Mayport today. And there he met with another chief, and we believe his name to have been Saturiba. And there, again, there was an attempt to find a place where a colony could be established, to establish relationships with the natives so that he could assess, is this a place where we can grow crops, where we can have relationships with the natives, where we can take land, and also with a missionary zeal to make these natives part of what he believed was their faith and important to their salvation.
And Ribault would stay a few days. You'll get it exact for me, but before he left, something very important happened, and we'll go to another image for that. And if you'll talk about what happened before he left the North Florida area.